So today we are going to discuss about potentially malignant disorders. So what do you mean by that? As a practitioner, you're going to look at many lesions, and they're broadly classified as white lesions and red lesions, which have a very high risk of malignant transformation. And they come under two categories, lesions and conditions, and that's what we're going to study today. We'll start with defining them, and then we'll describe the etiology and clinical features of leukoplakia, that's a premalignant lesion, and we'll discuss what is dysplasia, which is the histopathological diagnosis of these lesions and conditions. And we'll also define and describe what was earlier called as carcinoma in situ and currently referred to as intraepithelial carcinoma. Premalignancy can be differentiated from malignancy only by the malignant tumor's ability to invade and to metastasize. And the best predictor of this potential malignant transformation is the degree of dysplasia which we see histologically. So, whenever there is a red and white patch, biopsy is mandatory. And dysplasia means bad growth or abnormal growth. And this term is given for the cytological abnormalities and the architectural changes which we see in both malignant and premalignant cells. The definition of precancerous lesion is that it is a benign morphologically altered tissue that has a greater than normal risk of malignant transformation, and the examples would be leukoplakia, erythroplakia, and palatal lesions which are seen in reverse smokers. An oral precancerous condition is defined as a generalized pathological state of the oral mucosa associated with a significantly increased risk of cancer, and the example would be oral submucous fibrosis, which we are going to discuss, and the other examples are lichen planus, discoid lupus erythematosus, and actinic keratosis. Leukoplakia was defined by WHO as a white patch or a plaque that cannot be characterized either clinically or pathologically as any other disease. These are the other premalignant lesions which come under that category of tissues which have a higher risk of malignant transformation. Leuko means white and plakia is for plaque. What is the reason for its white appearance? We'll discuss in detail later, but here I would like to tell you that the clinical color is because of the thickened surface keratin layer, and this appears white when it is wet, of course, because of the surrounding saliva. Also, because of the thickened spinous layer, which masks the vascularity of the underlying connective tissue, hence the tissue appears even more white. Leukoplakia is one of the most common oral precancer, comprising about 85% of the lesions, which has the potential to convert to malignancy. The specific etiology is unknown. I'll discuss with you the list of etiology which have been hypothesized, but specific etiology is unknown. And the potential rate of malignant transformation is 4%. Etiological agents which have been discussed are genetic, tobacco with alcohol, which together form a synergistic effect, ultraviolet radiations, even microorganisms like Treponema pallidum and Candida have a role in the occurrence of leukoplakia because they've been seen or identified in association with leukoplakia, and trauma as well, which we could understand on the basis that any chronic irritation could lead to such transformation. It is usually seen in older individuals, and female have higher risk of malignant transformation compared to males. And the sites which are at a higher risk of malignant transformation are posterolateral tongue and floor of the mouth. And these are the same sites which are very common in squamous cell carcinoma. So that is a clear indication that there is a process of transformation, usually from normal to pre-malignant to malignant. So based on the appearance, it is classified clinically into different types. It could occur as a very thin leukoplakia in the early stages. It could occur as a homogeneous, thick leukoplaque-like lesion, that is white plaque-like lesions. If there are any granular structures within this white plaque-like structure, it's called as granular leukoplakia. If it's an exophytic growth, it's called as versiform leukoplakia. And there is a specific type called as proliferative verrucous leukoplakia, which is caused by Epstein-Barr virus. Verrucous basically means that they're keratotic plaques with rough surface projections, and these have high risk of malignant transformation. This is a nice image to show you a normal mucosa, a thin leukoplakia, a thick fissured leukoplakia, granular, you can see the granules in between, that's the granular, and versiform. The exophytic projections are the versiform leukoplakia. And there is a type where there is a mixture of red and white lesion that is called as speckle leukoplakia. So the clinical lesions can represent a huge spectrum of diagnostic features, which could range from inflammatory reaction to benign or malignant changes. So how would you decide what's the appropriate treatment? In no matter what cases, if you see a suspicious white or red lesion, I told you that biopsy is mandatory. So you take a biopsy, whether it's incisional or excisional, you evaluate histopathologically, and then you decide your treatment options. So hyperparakeratosis, that is excessive keratin production, and the keratin type here is parakeratin with remnants of pycnotic nuclei. Acanthosis, that is increase in the thickness of the spinous cell layer, are features which are seen in normal appearing epithelium as well, and in pre-malignant lesions and conditions. These must not be confused as dysplasia. So let's see what is dysplasia.
So the diagnosis histologically is dysplasia, and dysplasia has individual cell alterations and architectural alterations.
So when it comes to the architectural alteration, there could be formation of bulbous retipex. As you know, the retipex are more like a test tube shaped or finger shaped. But if they become like a bulb, they're bulbous, then it is one of the architectural alterations of dysplasia. Basilar hyperplasia. Usually, the basal cell of the epithelium has the capacity to multiply and proliferate. But when they are too many in number, the basilar layer itself, so that is called as basilar hyperplasia. So this is like a preparation to proliferate extensively and become carcinogenic. Hypercellularity, in general, you will see more cells in the epithelium than the normal, and they look crowded. And there is an altered maturation pattern of the keratinocytes. What it means is that the mitotic figures, which are usually seen in the basal and the parabasal layers, are also seen in the superficial layers of the epithelium, which is normally not seen. Okay, so that is the architectural alteration which is seen in the epithelium. What about the cytological alterations? You know what is a nucleoli. So the nucleoli becomes very prominent. The nuclei becomes hyperchromatic. I've explained to you what is hyperchromasia. So the color of the nuclei is enhanced, okay, and it is enlarged as well. So it is very prominently seen. So that's the hyperchromatic nuclei. And the nuclei is not that typical oval shaped. It will have different shapes. So that is called as pleomorphism, meaning multiple morphology, okay, several morphology. Normal nuclei to cytoplasm ratio is 1 is to 4, but here it increases because I told the nuclei is hyperchromatic and enlarged. So nuclei occupies bigger space. So 1 is to 4, 1 is nuclei and the 4 is the cytoplasm, but here the nuclei ratio will be increased, okay. What is mitosis? Nothing but the cell division which we see in the eukaryotes, and it is increased because there is a lot of proliferation and division which is happening. And it is not just the normal mitosis, even there is abnormal mitosis. So, abnormal mitotic figures can be seen within the and poikilokaryosis is nothing but the multinucleation of cells, meaning there is more than one nuclei present within the cell. So all these are alterations at the cellular level. This is at the epithelial level. Okay, I'll show you some pictures to make you understand better. So this is the prominent nucleoli. So this is the nucleoli is present within the nuclei, and you can see how it's become prominent. Hyperchromasia is when the nuclei becomes dark in color. Okay, normally it is this bluish, but here it is like dark blue. Nuclear pleomorphism, you can see it is not oval in shape, it's like weird shape. Altered nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, the nuclei is so big that it is filling up the entire cell, and the cytoplasm has become lesser compared to the other cells, which if you notice here. And increased number of mitosis and different stage of mitosis also you will see, and abnormal mitosis is as well seen, and multinucleation, that is more than one nuclei within the cell. So if you just see these images, whatever I explained till now will be easily understood. I don't think you'll have any doubts. So let's see the histopathologically what are the things which we see. Acanthosis, an increase in the thickness of the spinous cell layer, and hyperorthokeratosis, there is no remnants of the nuclei in the keratin which is deposited. Again, acanthosis, that is number 2, increase in thickness of the spinous cell layer. And this is the inflammatory cells. It is called as juxtaepithelial inflammatory cell infiltration because it is just immediately below the epithelium. Juxtaepithelium means right next to the epithelium. And you can see the redder ridges are very broad. Okay, so these are the broad shaped redder ridges, and we'll see basal cell hyperplasia. It's not very clear in this image, but basically you will see more than one layer of basal cells, the tall columnar cells. Okay. So these are some of the images for you to understand the architectural changes. The bulbous redder ridge, which you can see, and here you can see that there are more than one number of the basal cell layer, and this is not a sign of the normal maturity. Okay, and you will see mitosis even in the superficial layers. That's another sign of the architectural change. And whenever we are looking at dysplasia, we grade it based upon the extent of involvement of the epithelium in these changes. So both the architectural and the cellular changes, to what extent of the epithelium is it seen? So based on that, we classify it into mild, moderate, and severe. So in the mild dysplasia, okay, so this is for your understanding, and this is the histopathological picture. So you can see that all the changes are within the basal and parabasal layer. This is limited to the lower 1/3 of the epithelium. Moderate dysplasia extending up till the middle 1/3, that is the moderate dysplasia. You can see all the changes extending till the middle layer. And severe is extending beyond the 2/3 of the epithelium. Okay, so you can see that all the changes, the cytological alterations are beyond the 2/3 the thickness of the epithelium. Okay, so that is severe dysplasia. So here you can see very clear distinction of all the three histopathological pictures. So this is a normal epithelium where there is just increase in the spinacell layer, whereas in mild dysplasia there are cytological alterations which are seen in the lower one third of the epithelium. If it is seen up to middle one third, it is called as moderate dysplasia, and if it is seen beyond two third, it is called as severe dysplasia. There's another grading of dysplasia where it involves the entire thickness of the epithelium from top to bottom, but it is not crossing the basement membrane and going into the connective tissue. That's when it's called as malignant. It is contained within the epithelium, but it is traversing through the entire thickness of epithelium, and that they say has to be treated like a carcinoma and is called as intraepithelial carcinoma. Although it is not broken the basement barrier, but it is still considered as a carcinoma because it is extending throughout the entire thickness. Okay. So I told you there are roles of certain microorganisms within leukoplakia. So I will just tell you about the Candida. So the leukoplakia caused by Candida is called as candidal leukoplakia. Okay. So there are two ways it can act. The person is smoking, his immunity is down, so there is candidal infection. Person is wearing the denture and there is some irritation or friction causing keratosis, and that is followed by a candidal infection. And that results in leukoplakia, but the base cause is the candida. Okay, and the candidal leukoplakia is nodular in appearance. Okay, so that's why the candida is seen in association with a lot of leukoplakic cases and is thought to have a very important role in the incidence of leukoplakia. So I told you two such instances. One is when there is immune deficiency, and the other when the person is wearing denture. Two scenarios. So how do you manage it is either by surgical excision, you remove the whole lesion, and electrocautery can be done. You can use an electric current and burn it. That's what is called as cautery. So in this, we'll study about erythroplakia and about oral submucous fibrosis. So erythroplakia is the other pre-malignant lesion, and oral submucous fibrosis is a pre-malignant condition. Erythro means red, plakia means plaque. So the term erythroplakia itself is telling you that the lesion is red and velvety in color, and it is a plaque-like lesion seen in older men. Okay, so here you can see, so this reddish area which you see is the erythroplakia, and if it is mixed with the white lesion, that is called as the speckled leukoplakia or speckled lesion, mixed lesion. Why it is red in color is because there is no keratin production. Okay, that's the difference between the leuko and erythro. In leukoplakia, there is a lot of keratin deposition. That's what is giving it a white appearance. Whereas in erythroplakia, there is no keratin production. So I told you that epithelium or the mucosa tries to protect itself by forming keratin because it wants to ward off all the toxins entering. But when the epithelium itself loses its inherent nature, then it cannot produce keratin anymore. Okay, so the dysplastic changes are so much, and the epithelium has actually become atrophic. Atrophy means decrease in the thickness of the epithelium. Okay, so because it is atrophic and dysplastic, and there is no keratin production, so the lesion appears reddish. There is no keratin absolutely, because the epithelium has lost its inherent ability to produce the keratin. The epithelium nature is to produce keratin and to protect itself. Okay, but in this scenario, it has lost its ability to form any kind of keratin, and the epithelium has become very thin or atrophic along with dysplasia. Okay, so that's why erythroplakia will have a higher risk of malignant transformation and also there is no keratin to protect it anymore. So erythroplakia has a higher risk of malignant transformation, and there are a lot of chronic inflammatory cells also seen. So the treatment, of course, you excise it either incisional or excisional biopsy. Take it for further examination if it is very big. But if you have already removed it, then you're good to go. And the floor of the mouth and the lateral tongue, I showed you, even in the leukoplakia, these are the two sites which have a very high risk of malignant transformation. That's why it has to be checked very thoroughly under the microscope to see if it has already become malignant. Okay. So let's continue with the oral submucous fibrosis. That's the pre-malignant condition. So it is defined as an insidious chronic disease affecting any part of the oral cavity and even the oropharynx, okay, not the pharynx, entire pharynx, but the oropharynx, and is always associated with juxtaepithelial inflammatory reaction. Juxtaepithelial means just below, okay? You will see a band of inflammatory cells just below the epithelium. This is followed by fibroelastic changes in the lamina propria, that's your connective tissue, with epithelial atrophy. So two things we see together: epithelial atrophy, fibroelastic changes in the connective tissue. Okay, these are the two things. This leads to the stiffness of the oral mucosa, causing trismus and difficulty in eating. The normal opening of the mouth will be reduced or restricted, and that is called as trismus. Okay, let's see what is the etiopathogenesis. So there is something called as areca. Again, these people chew it. Okay, it's something which they chew, and again, it is seen in various parts of the world where people chew areca along with other condiments, and this releases alkaloids. And that's what stimulates the fibroblasts which are present within the connective tissue to form increased collagen. You know, fibroblasts are the cells which forms collagen. So they're stimulated by some products which are released from the areca. And there's something called as tannin, which is again released from the areca, that causes a stabilization, or how can I put it, as whatever excess collagen is produced, it is not destroyed. Your body recognizes it as extra collagen, but it's not doing anything about it. So that's what tannin does. It protects the extra collagen which is deposited. Plus, these collagen become resistant to degradation. Even if there is a lytic activity, it doesn't break down at all. So that's the quality of the collagen which is being produced in this condition. So that's what results in excessive deposition of collagen, and that's what causes the stiffness of the oral mucosa. Oral, you know, oral cavity. Submucous is the submucosa. Fibrosis is excessive fibrous production or deposition. This is resulting from the increased production of collagen by the fibroblasts. How are the fibroblasts stimulated? It is by the areca, the alkaloids which are present in the areca, and the tannin which is present in the areca. Okay, so tannin has a role in the decreased breakdown of the fibers which are deposited. So both these together, that is increased production of collagen and decreased breakdown of collagen. Okay, let me repeat it again. Increased production of collagen plus decreased breakdown of the collagen together causes excessive fibrosis in the oral cavity. Okay, so that's the oral submucous fibrosis. I've already told there is increased collagen production, decreased collagen breakdown, and along with that, all the collagen produced is stabilized. It is in a stable condition. So it's the tannin I told you in the flow chart. That's what helps to stabilize the collagen. How does it stabilize is what we're going to look at. It does what is called as cross-linking. Okay, so when it cross-links all the collagen that is produced by the fibroblast, that's what makes it resistant to degradation. So tannin has a very important role in oral submucous fibrosis. Along with tannin, the betel nut also has copper. Even this copper helps in cross-linking of the collagen fibers which are deposited. Okay, so it's a constituent of the enzyme lysyl oxidase, and that's what helps in the cross-linking. So both of these together, the copper and tannin, causes the cross-linking. What's the result of cross-linking? Whatever collagen is produced becomes resistant to degradation. Okay, so just a quick summary. So arecanut has alkaloids which are released that stimulates the fibroblasts to form high collagen. Okay, more collagen is produced. There is tannin in the arecanut and copper in the arecanut. So both of them make whatever collagen is produced stabilized by cross-linking it, and that makes them resistant to any phagocytosis or lysis, if I can say. So both these together, that is increased collagen synthesis and decreased degradation of collagen, results in excessive accumulation causing OSMF. Okay, so clinically, I already told you that it will have fibrosis. So that's what is reflected even in clinical when you're seeing it. And when you palpate it, you can see very thick fiber deposition. Young females and buccal mucosa is the most common site, as you can see here. And the mucosa, this is a man, but I was referring to the buccal mucosa site. The mucosa becomes blotchy, marble-like, and very stiff. Okay, very hard when they say marble-like, and even in appearance, very whitish it will be. And the tongue, if it is involved, will become immobile. You cannot move your tongue. That's what happens if tongue is involved in OSMF. And trismus, that's the inability to open the mouth, is seen. And in severe cases, you can see that it is so restricted that the patient interincisal distance, this looks lesser than 20 millimeters. This is the only amount of mouth opening the patient can do, and this is seen in the severe cases. Along with that, in the beginning especially, there is a burning sensation whenever the patient is eating any spicy food, any hot food. There is a burning sensation within the oral cavity, whether it's buccal mucosa, tongue, or whatever is affected. All this will have burning sensation, and some amount of pain also is associated. So there are two stages. There are two ways of staging OSMF, like how we graded leukoplakia as mild, moderate, severe. So same way, there is functional grading and clinical grading. Okay, so the functional grading depends upon the amount of the mouth opening, which we discussed just now. So 20 millimeter is type A, 11 to 19 is type B, and 10 is the severe, that is the 10, that is the C. And clinically, if only the phageal bands are seen, that's type 1 or the clinical stage 1. And 2 is when both phageal and buccal bands are affected. When all the three, that's the phageal, buccal, and labial are affected, that's the stage 3 we can see. So the normal mouth opening in any patient, they say, is 3 finger or 2 finger based on your size, your own hand, the patient's own hand. That's the normal mouth opening. You can all check by your fingers, the 3 fingers. Okay, and you can see here that in these 2 patients, it is almost 2 finger opening. So this you can say is somewhere in between. And this is the most severe case, that is about just 10 millimeter of mouth opening in this patient. And you might be shocked to see that there are small kids who are indulging in this habit, and they're all affected by OSMF. So histopathologically, what do we see is hypertrophic epithelium in the beginning. In the earlier stages, the epithelium reacts by forming an increased thickness, there is hypertrophy of the epithelium, and there's a lot of inflammatory cells which we see. But this is in the beginning stage of the oral submucous fibrosis. But as the lesion progresses, you can see that the rete-ridges are all flattened, and the juxta epithelial inflammatory cells are still seen, that is just below the epithelium. And there is an abundant deposition of collagen fibers. You can see there is collagen everywhere. All this is collagen. So that's what is responsible for the fibrosis, as we discussed. And again, the lesion will progress further, and the epithelium will become completely atrophic. Okay, like we saw the atrophic epithelium in erythroplakia. Atrophy means decrease in the thickness of the epithelium. You can see it's so thin. Epithelium has become very thin, whereas if you see the connective tissue, it's entirely fibrosed. Extensive fibrosis, thick collagen bundles are deposited all over the submucosa, and along with that, the muscles are coming in contact very close to the lesion because of the fibrosis and the thinning of the epithelium. The muscular layer is coming very close and superficial, and this is another reason for the trismus which we see in this patient. So in the beginning stages, the epithelium reacts by hypertrophy. What is hypertrophy? Increase in the thickness of the epithelium. So atrophy is the thinning of the epithelium or reduced thickness of epithelium. So in the beginning stage, it is hypertrophy. Later stage, we see atrophy. And in between, we see inflammatory infiltrate, okay, flattening of the rete-ridges, and you can see that there is excessive deposition of the collagen fibers. All this is in between. And as the lesion has progressed to a very severe stage, you see atrophy, dense collagen fiber bundle, and muscular layer is also undergoing degeneration and has come very close to the submucosal layer. Okay, so that's what causes together the fibrosis, the stiffness, the trismus is all a result of all of them together. So there are several ways of managing this. So there are some people who take a very rich vitamin diet along with the iron. Okay, so this has worked with some people, especially when it comes to relieving the trismus. Okay, but it doesn't have like a proper it's not actually a proper treatment. You can say this is like a supportive treatment which we do. So you can prescribe a very high vitamin rich diet, and also you can ask the patient not to eat the spicy food, because some patients the spicy and hot food are also an etiologic agent. So you ask them to avoid those foods. And B complex along with the iodine. So you can use it either orally, like normally we take the vitamin B complex, or you can use it as an injection as well. And this is seen to help a lot with the overall condition of the patient, especially the B complex. And steroids, the hydrocortisone injection along with the hydrochloride can be injected locally. Okay, with wherever there is fibrosis, you give an injection every 2 weeks. Fortnight means every 2 weeks. So you give an injection of this, and over a period of time there is an improvement which is seen. And Placentrix is nothing but a placental extract. How it works is because of its regenerative capacity. So it kind of heals that area and regenerates the epithelium and the mucosa back to its original condition. And even hyaluronidase can be given, because hyaluronidase will break down all the excessive collagen which is formed, because that's what is causing the fibrosis in the patient. So you want something externally to break it down, because the patient's body is not doing it by itself. So you inject hyaluronidase so that it can break down and make like a normal connective tissue. And in those patients who have trismus, that is difficulty in opening the mouth, especially the severe patients in which it's limited to just 10 millimeter. Okay. So for those, you do oral physiotherapy. You must have heard physiotherapy for fractures and other things. Yeah. So oral physiotherapy is also something which is existing, and you should be aware of it. So oral exercises are advised, and especially in the early and moderate cases, and this includes the mouth opening and ballooning of the mouth gradually. You can also do a forceful mouth opening by using a screw. So you put a screw. Okay, you use a metallic like a caliber kind of a thing, and then you open it slowly. Okay, so these are called as acrylic surgical screw, not the metallic, sorry, acrylic. So this slowly opens the mouth to increased millimeters. Suppose it was 10, then after say 1 or 2 weeks, it goes another 2 millimeters up, another 2 millimeters. So slowly you're training the mouth to open more and more. Okay.
Thank you and keep smiling. And please subscribe to my channel.